Expo in Los Angeles, California, with a special edition of GameSpot TV.
Yeah, this is E3. This is the one-time-a-year event where all the major players in the industry get together, show off their wares, see what the other guy has, and schmooze.
What you just heard was the intro to GameSpot TV's 1999 coverage of the E3 conference. It was full of excitement and energy and possibility for the brand new consoles and games to come. This is what IGN's coverage sounds like in 2023.
Almost a year after announcing its return, the Entertainment Software Association announced today to its members that this year's E3 has been canceled. The event was supposed to be held from June 13th through June 26th at the Los Angeles Convention Center and would have been the first in-person E3 event since 2019. Two sources have confirmed to IGN that the organization announced the cancellation via an email sent out to its members today. The email said that while E3 remains a beloved event and brand, that the 2023 version, quote, simply did not garner the sustained interest necessary to execute it in a way that would showcase the size, strength, and impact of our industry. E3's return for this year was announced last June.
So what happened? How did a conference so beloved and vital to the video game industry fall flat on its face in the 2020s? Was it COVID? Was it Nintendo Directs? Was it the internet and social media? Or was it just a sign of the times? I don't have great answers to these questions, but luckily, I know people who might. And rather than memorialize the end of E3, because who knows, it may be a thing in the future, join Greg Seward of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, CJ of the Player One podcast, and ex-EGM editor Dan Shu, as we talk about the memories of E3, the majesty and pageantry that the conference was once, and discuss what, if anything, we can expect in the future. Time to hold on to those wristbands and get cozy on the couch as we dive into episode 78 of A Gamer Looks at 40, an E3 retrospective with the EGM editors.
G4 live at E3.
Believe it or not, I'm watching E3. I never thought I'd get in so easily. Watching G4 in my beat-up chair. What will I see? Believe it or not, it's E3.
The biggest, baddest video game expo, live on G4.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much again for hanging out with me for yet another episode of A Gamer Looks at 40. Today, we're going to be talking about the E3 conference. I guess it's a conference more than the festival. Yeah, conference, I guess. And kind of, as I said before in the virtual green room, when I first thought about this episode, I'm like, oh, the guys really have obviously been to a lot of E3s and have, experienced that conference and everything and its evolution throughout the years. And then it gets canceled. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess we can still talk about it. Why not? This is going to air right around when E3 was supposed to be in kind of like early mid-June. And guys, so I just want to kind of start right off the bat with who had the earliest E3 experience out of the three, you think?
I'm willing to bet it's CJ.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it is, though. I was not at the first E3. Were you at the first E3, Shu?
My first one was 1997.
Mine was 98. Oh, then maybe it was me.
Yeah, the first one was 95, from what I could read.
Yeah.
My first one would have been 1996. I remember Ed Semrat, who's the editor-in-chief at the time, pulled me into his office and said, we're going to send you to E3. And I was so excited. I'm like, oh man, that's so awesome. And that was my first year at EGM, but I was getting married that same exact week, my first marriage. So I'm like, oh, I can't go. It did flash through my mind for a second, like, can we postpone it? Can we reschedule the wedding? But I was like, there's no way I don't even know how to broach that subject. So.
That's a wise man. I don't think that's something you bring up. Like, hey, you ever want to go LA? We can go LA for our for the wedding. I think that would be great.
A great new honeymoon idea. A video game themed wedding. Let's do it.
Yes, well, I doubt that would have totally worked, especially in those days, I guess, because in those days, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was really more of a trade show than anything else, right? It was really for retailers. Was media a big part of that in those early days, or?
Not a big part of it, but it was definitely a part of it. It was definitely a retailer-oriented show, but they took media meetings all the time as well. So I don't know. I don't know if it's 50-50, but you wouldn't call it a media show, but media was everywhere.
I know there were buyers for the various chains there, but I don't think any of us really had like a look at what those meetings would have been like. We saw those people, we saw business people strolling the floor, of course, but we kind of had no idea what was going on at that end of the business at that point.
Yeah, like my memory of it is that it was actually very press focused, but that's probably my own personal bias because that's all I was paying attention to.
Sure.
Yeah, because it's weird because a lot of times you would see, like, there's the booth out with the games out front for anyone to walk up to, but then they'll have like a quiet area, and a lot of companies had additional demos in the back, either in meeting rooms where they'll have like individual games, or they'll have full stations set up in a back area that you cannot access unless you have permission or you're escorted back there. And a lot of times it was just like, there's some media meetings back there, definitely, but a lot of times it looked like it was just a bunch of more business suits and more professional looking people than us media people, right? Going around being taken to station because they're trying to show off these games, right? They're like, hey, look at this one, and so they kind of did a lot of it away from the show floor as well, behind security or behind closed doors.
I remember I couldn't tell you which one. I'm sure Nintendo would be a great example of this from back then, but I remember booths where you generally have like a check-in desk or something, and then if you went back there, some booths were like just totally warrens of little rooms where all these, and like sometime multi-level, and like lounges on the top levels of some booths. I remember too, like they were pretty impressive structures, honestly. But yeah,
there was often like a buyer check-in and a media check-in, or two lines. We only went to the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you went there, now CJ, sounds like you've been there before, or I was like one of you probably went to the earliest one. Was it the 95? And before that, it was basically CES before E3.
Yeah, I didn't go in 95. My first one was 96, but I did go to CESs before E3. I went to a couple summer CESs. Because
from what I've read, the CES experience for at least video games was not the greatest, which kind of spawned off the E3 experience. Is that what your recollection was, or?
Yeah, that's accurate, because video games outgrew the CES experience. CES was much more about consumer electronics, about TVs, VCRs, camcorders, cable boxes, like kind of boring consumer electronics when you think about it. But their
video games.
Their video game area grew and grew like every year, and at a certain point, it seemed necessary for games to break out and have their own show. And there were two CESs every year. There was a winter one in Las Vegas, and then summer CES in Chicago. And now they're only down to one. It's only the winter CES in Las Vegas in January. But in the 90s, there were two.
Now, take us through a little bit of kind of that E3 experience, especially early on, because as time goes on, the show has evolved, right? Or had evolved until recently is not a thing at this very moment, but it had evolved, right? It was very, again, retailer focused, and then it kind of moved more into consumer focus, and then allowed the public to show up. But how was it in those early days of going to E3 in those like late 90s? What was the environment like? What was the vibe like within the building?
I mean, I think my first experience with the show is probably a little bit different than CJ and Shoes, because I went as a lowly website editor, like our own personal website. Like I wasn't there, I wasn't flown there by anybody or anything like that. And so, a lot of it was just handing out business cards and begging my way into different meeting rooms and stuff like that. But I just remember it. So the first one I went to was in Atlanta in 98, which I think was the final year that it was in Atlanta. And I remember getting into the show floor the first day and just being so amazed. I mean, like the the pageantry of all of it, like the booths were super impressive, and there were just screens everywhere, and it's all stuff you've never seen before, especially seen in motion, like even if you'd seen screenshots. And I want to say that was the year that Trespasser, that terrible Jurassic Park game, was shown. But I seem to remember there being a fairly big like dinosaur presence because of that too. I want to say that was near the front of the hall that I went into. But yeah, I mean, it was almost overwhelming, and I don't remember it ever not being crowded. Everyone that I went to, I just remember it being like shoulder to shoulder almost everywhere, and especially at certain points, like when Konami started showing Metal Gear Solid trailers, like that was always guaranteed to just like gridlock the whole floor in that area because people would just sit down and watch it over and over again. But yeah, it was always super crowded.
Yeah, I don't remember there being a time when it wasn't crowded, right? Like, even people who were not in the industry got in to the show.
Yeah, most of them through our website.
Well, either they were working for a website or they were working for like the local Funko Land or EB or Babbage's, and they got in that way, right? And my friend group in Illinois, we were all people who, outside of the magazine, people who worked at Babbage's. Because I worked at Babbage's when I was younger, and they like would road trip it to E3, and I'm sure they weren't alone. I'm sure lots of people were like that, where they worked at Babbage's, happened to get a pass to E3, and they went to the show. So
there were definitely not crowded E3s. There's the Santa Monica year. There's the the LA year after Santa Monica.
Why we're talking late 90s.
Okay. Why were those? Why do you think those? When were those? And why were those less attended? Do you think?
Ooh, wait. The LA after Santa Monica should have been around 2008, plus or minus a year, because I remember. I had left EGM, and then G4 was kind of wooing me to go work for them. So I'm like, I'll just work with you through E3, but I just experience it and to see what it's like working with G4 for a bit. But I didn't want to sign in with them long term. And then I was I was working that show, the one after Santa Monica. So Santa Monica was a reaction to like going back to like what Greg was saying about the pageantry, like these are kind of early, like pre and early internet days to where you kind of had to be there, right? Like there was no other way you're going to see all this stuff or get all this news, and then you read about it maybe weeks or months afterward when it comes out in print. So people, like companies, spend a lot of money there to just make a big show out of everything, and then. After a while, then Santa Monica was a reaction to, okay, it's kind of gotten too expensive and too big, and so let's change it to be more about the meetings. And then they had one big aircraft airline hangar thing. You guys keep me honest. If it was a hangar where they were like, okay, we'll set up this is the exhibitor hall basically, and then you could go in and check out games, but most of E3 was away from there. So you had to take a taxi or a shuttle there and then back. And then you would go in downtown Santa Monica, do all the meetings and such in different hotel rooms. And you'd like walk from hotel to hotel. And it was more about like, hey, just the one-on-one meetings versus like the big pageantry, just try to save money and try to see if this is more reasonable. And I remember actually, like I think it was Reuters that was interviewing me about this new E3. And then I talked to the reporter after this. He's like, as soon as he said this, I knew this was going to be a quote in my article. I said, it took me less than an hour to realize this is the worst E3 ever. And then that made it into the Reuters article. And then the president of the ESA called me after, because he was pissed. He was like, I can't believe you said, like, we do all this good for the show. We do all this stuff. Or for the industry and everything. I'm like, yeah, but E3 itself was terrible. No one liked that E3. So it wasn't like us saying something really controversial. It was just hard to get around. You had to walk around to different meetings. None of the excitement was there. And then they all knew it too, because then the next year was like, let's go back to the LA Convention Center, but really trim it down again in the name of like, maybe we don't need all of that pageantry. Let's make it a little bit more reasonable. And it just had one small hall with everything in there. And it was just no energy and no excitement. I remember talking to someone in PR who was saying, like, if you're mainstream TV and you wanted to come and cover the games industry, like, what would you see here that would excite you? Because there's like no crazy booths, no shows, no crazy displays. It was just kiosks, and then not that many. There's no energy to it whatsoever.
It was 2007 was the Santa Monica year. I just went and looked it up. That's a really good point too. And like when it was at the Staples Center, I mean, even the first time, like I don't remember much about the exterior in Atlanta, but when it was at the Staples Center, when we went back to LA, and that was my second year going, like I was really impressed by, like, even on the outside, like the Staples Center will be decked out. Like I'm looking at old pictures of like 2015 even and 2005 where like there's that big sort of front of the main building where there's like a giant Uncharted 4 poster. It's like stories high. And I remember there's some hotel there that like they would always put a giant banner up on that too. Like the whole
the
downtown LA area. Yeah, the Figueroa. Like it was all video games all the time. And like Shu said, like in the late 90s and early 2000s, I mean, it wasn't weird to go in and like one booth would have like a wrestling ring and they'd be doing wrestling matches, and there would like a half pipe with BMX bikers, and like Nintendo's booth had like a water feature that was shooting like water artistically across over and stuff like that. Like it was really, really high production value all the time.
Very much so. Yeah.
I don't think it was in the Staples Center though, right? That's the stadium.
I'm sorry.
It's next
door.
Yeah, it's next
to the Staples Center.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and in that early time, they would have celebrity signings too, like Gillian Anderson from the X-Files, when that show was on the air, was like signing stuff because there was an X-Files game, and you'd have
Bruce Willis
wrestlers,
like 4 games at once.
You'd have like sports heroes and stuff come through, and it was pomp and circumstance. Like it was just like a huge pageant of all this entertainment stuff wanting to be involved with video games at the time. So you had I think I have a picture of you, Greg, at the Ubisoft booth for a Survivor video game, and they had like booth babes for a Survivor video game. I have no idea why.
A treasure memento.
There used to be I remember the celebrities being a big thing there, and there was an age where it was like the late 90s and early 2000s where video games, have gotten big, but they're not like today,
right?
Where you would have like a Last of Us TV show that's like potentially winning awards and stuff like that, right? It's like it wasn't respected, and I would hear these secondhand stories about celebrities from like I remember I don't remember what game this was, but I was supposed to have an interview with Jon Favreau about something, and I couldn't make it. And then later I ran into the PR person who was taking care of that. And I'm like, oh, dude, I'm really sorry. I couldn't, I forgot what it was. I had some conflict or something. So I couldn't make it down there in time. And he's like, that's all right. That guy's a dick. And then he was not happy about having to work with him and having to deal with him. And then I heard this other story from another PR friend who was like, talking about just how stuck up Paula Abdul was. She was there to promote, I think, an American Idol game. And then just the way she wanted to be treated and handled was like she's too big for the video game industry, and then the way she just kind of had disdain for everybody around her and all of that stuff. So it's just kind of funny. Couple of anecdotes. I don't know how widespread that was, but.
Oh, no.
But then like conversely, you'd have, oh my God, his name just completely escaped me. This is terrible. You'd have like Robin Williams just show up and play everything because he's a huge video game fan, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So he would go, and like it wasn't weird to run into him. I mean, you didn't get to stand and talk to him. He's Robin Williams. What are you gonna, but he would just go through and be playing all the games and stuff like that.
That's really cool, and I think that's interesting too. where games have always been fighting for relevance, right? In the sphere of entertainment. And having a big pageantry show like an E3, and again, at the time you guys are talking about, this is still not a public thing. This is for retailers and media people, and this is for all the big studios to showcase their latest and greatest stuff. I could definitely see a celebrity being a little annoyed that, oh, really? I got to go to this video game thing because they plastered my face on some American Idol. I could definitely see that being a thing. Do you ever have interactions with celebrities who actually were really into it, like a Robin Williams, who clearly loved games and was happy to be there? I can see it being a bit of a situation for a celebrity where it's like, really, video games? This is what I'm doing this Saturday?
I mean, yeah, you're talking about celebrities who are like, they get interviewed in Entertainment Weekly and
right,
whatever big People magazine, and they're used to that world, right? Like, and whereas like, oh, here we are, EGM, one of the biggest video game magazines. It's like nothing to them still compared to what they're used to. So they don't care about meeting us, getting interviewed by us, or getting interviewed by a GameSpot website or anything like that. Like these are like not even on their radar or anything like that. But yeah, I don't personally remember like any kind of celebrities who are just like genuinely enthusiastic about this stuff. Like I know I've never met him and I've never run into him, but I know Greg's right about Robin Williams. I've heard that too, about how he's just like, you know, that's why his daughter's named Zelda. Like he's super into gaming and he loves this stuff.
Yeah. I did get to interview Bruce Campbell twice at E3 because of the various Evil Dead games. And he was super nice, but not a gamer. And we mostly just talked about the movies in our interview. So, yeah. So kind of going off that a little bit, when you're in that environment, again, it sounds like sounds like chaos. And anytime, even like reading like an EGM or a GamePro, and they, shots from E3, and you'd see the big shot of the showroom floor, and it's just wall to wall madness. What were some pleasant surprises that you walked into E3, saw something cool you didn't expect, and like those pleasant surprises?
I feel like that's part of like sort of a bigger conversation, because I see, especially with all the problems that E3's having now, and like what she was talking about, how they were trying to, reduce costs and ended up really ruining the show when they tried that those years. But I think like people have to realize that like in the late 90s and the early 2000s, like the terrain was so much different. Like now it's nothing to be able to go online and see a game that's like, months or years away. If there's footage of it, see it in motion. That for me was the biggest thing. Is like you'd walk in, and even if you knew that something existed, actually seeing it and touching it and playing it was like the experience. Because, up until that point, you would be going off of screenshots and descriptions, and you kind of would build up what a game was in your head. But of course, the experience of actually playing something would be a whole lot different. But I remember, I think one of the things that I remember seeing that I had no idea what it was, and looking back on it, I don't think anyone did, but I remember seeing The Sims at E3 one year. And like, I don't think I want to say it was on one screen the first time it was ever shown at E3.
Wow.
Because I don't think anyone. I think it had more to do with like, this is Will Wright's thing, and he's brilliant. But God, what the hell is this? Like, this is never going to be big. So we'll park him next to a single screen and people can talk to him. I don't know, but yeah. I also remember like once
Did you think he was going to be big after you saw it?
No, not at all. Wow. No, I didn't get it at all. Like, I was just like, oh, it's okay. So it's SimCity, but now it's like, it's drilled down to like the actual citizens. That's interesting. I'm going to go play Madden now, but, but yeah, I think it was just in general, I don't know. I don't remember getting, super surprised by the existence of a whole lot, but, it was just getting to see it and touch it and play it. Like that was the big deal.
It kind of shifted over time. Like in the late 90s, from like 96 to 99, there were a lot of times where during the press conferences, there would be surprises, because oftentimes those PR people wouldn't share things with us. So like one when Pokemon got announced for the US, and I think right before Banjo-Kazooie was announced, there was that rumor that, Rare is working on this Dream game for Nintendo's new system. And you didn't know what that was until, here it is, Rare is working on Banjo-Kazooie. So nobody knew that beforehand. And that happened a lot sort of in that late 90s period. But then after 99, starting in like 2000 to 2002, we would start getting assets from the big publishers early. And because we were a magazine, we had like a month or more lead time. They could share some of those screenshots with us. They wouldn't be in an issue until after E3 anyway. So oftentimes in those later shows, and I say later, still 20 years ago, we would have some of that information at least beforehand. So as time went on with E3, we sort of knew what we were walking into a lot more than the earlier years of the show.
One of my big surprises was actually seeing Soul Calibur on Dreamcast, because I totally agree with what Chris said, and I think you have an idea, you know what's going to happen, but Soul Calibur was one, if I'm not mistaken, we didn't get to see beforehand. So all we knew of Soul Calibur was the arcade game, Soul Blade, the original Soul Blade. And we had we did actually have the arcade board at work. So we were able to play Soul Calibur at work. But the first time I saw it in Dreamcast form, I was like, oh my God, I felt this is next generation hardware. Like the textures, the models, the frame rate were all so superior to the arcade version in it, because we weren't used to that, right? Like a lot of fighting games or arcade games, they're just pretty much straight ports, and they look like you were happy back in those days if the game looked as good as it did in the arcade. And this was one where the console one far, far, far surpassed the arcade game. And I was like, oh my God, this was incredible. And I was just like blown away. And so I remember some of the experience of E3 to me is actually kind of sad, of like, oh man, I just experienced this greatness, and then now I won't be able to touch it for perhaps months, like months and months and months. And that was one, I was so in love with Soul Calibur. I was constantly, because I think I must have been previews editor back then. It's
a highly honored position.
Yeah, that's right. Only the best get put into that spot.
Best and brightest.
But I was constantly telling PR for Namco, I was like, you got to bring this by. We need to cover this more, because I was just like, this game's fantastic. And then they did come by one time, and we got to play it for like half a day, I think, like one afternoon. And then everyone in office, like, because we had several magazines in the office, not just EGM. There's like EGM, EGM2, official PlayStation magazine. Everyone wanted to see it because it's just mind blowing how good it looked and how well it played. So we were all like, everyone's lining up to play, and I was like practically begging her. It was kind of sad, but I was practically begging her to leave it with us. That wasn't going to happen. So then after they left, it's like, back to arcade Soul Blade again. It looked so awful by comparison. So we played that just out because we had no other choice.
What's better than EGM hype? What's better than console releases? And what's better than the most epic Nintendo Direct you can find? My wonderful patrons. Please give a warm thank you to Games with Coffee, the Let's Play Princess, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Seth Sergil of the All In Podcast, Ryan Payne of Gamers Week Podcast, the aforementioned Greg Seward of Player One Podcast and the Generation 16 series of videos, Patrice Millette, BT Goebbels, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Dan of Retrologic, and the one and only Pete Harney. If you'd like to join these wonderful human beings, please sign up at patreon.com/agamerlooks40. Check out the tiers, and I hope that this show has earned your trust and financial backing. Let's get back into the episode. Now, obviously a big part of the E3 experience, and again, as somebody who obviously never attended it, even when it was open to the public, it was one of those dreams, like, oh, I wish I could go to an E3, and you see the coverage. I can imagine being there, especially as people who are working, Because I think some people realize with conventions and things of this nature, if you're doing press, you are there to work. I mean, it's fun. I'm sure y'all have tons of stories about how much fun you've had at E3, but at the end of the day, you have to make something at the end. What was the pressure like to get stuff done in the midst of all this? Just, it looked like chaos every time I saw, again, a screenshot or a pixelated real audio or real video about what was going on there.
It definitely depended on, for print anyways. For online is a completely different story.
Sure.
But for print, and let me back up. So online, like more recently when 1UP was a thing, all the print people would chip in to help write articles for online, because then we would increase the staff greatly, right? So it wasn't just, hey, 1UP team, you go all do all the heavy lifting and the overnight reporting and running back to your computers to put up a new story. And then the print people are just sitting back and taking our time and waiting for the show to be over. It was like we would chip in and they would be like all hands on deck to help with the online coverage of 1UP. But before 1UP, in the print days, we would have, if you're lucky, the next step, because our deadlines are not really flexible. Like our print schedules, like worked out with the printers. There's a distribution company that's going to pick up those magazines later. Like that's all set in stone. So if we're lucky, we just finished the night and we go into E3 just having the most fun, because you could just like take down everything, record everything, and then when you get back, you would still have a couple of weeks to get all your coverage into the magazine and kind of sort out your thoughts and get everything planned. So you didn't have to rush anything. There's also the other side of it. If like deadline is right after E3 or right during E3, and then like let's squeeze it in if possible instead of waiting a full month, a full issue later. And that's, for the business, that's the best case scenario, because that's like, okay, if deadline is coming right up at the end of E3, that means you're able to squeeze in E3 coverage one of the earliest cycles possible for print, because that within a month, your coverage is going to be out in like 3 weeks from that point or so.
Yeah.
And we've had times, I've experienced both, and one's a lot more fun. One's a lot better for the magazine.
I'm sure.
Well, you would remember, like, oftentimes E3 coverage would be like on the last page of the magazine or whatever, and that would be, you sort of send the magazine out to the printers in sections, right? I think they were called signatures. Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
I don't remember. Yeah, something like that.
But anyway, so your last one would be where you could put anything that happened like at the very last minute. So that's why like mid-90s EGM sometimes would have like a very last moment thing on the last page, screenshots of something.
Right.
Yeah, and the rest of the magazine doesn't acknowledge it because that was all written before you even got to E3.
Yeah.
But CJ, I'm pretty sure you were there when, I don't remember if Greg, you were on the magazine yet, where 1 year the magazine was pretty much done. We're about to go to E3, but they were like, we worked it out with the printer. I didn't work it out. The bosses, the higher ups did. They're like, we could do an insert, I forgot how big it was, but it was several pages where we could squeeze in a booklet, like a 16-page booklet. It might have been 8 pages or something like that, but of E3 coverage that we include with the magazine, but that was detached, a separate little newsletter.
Right.
So we're like, okay, that allowed us to like squeeze it in with that magazine, ship it with that magazine without holding back, like what CJ's just described. Like there's not one section that's waiting for the rest of this. Like, so the rest of the magazine's already starting to print. We're going to do this special thing. So our team, I remember like Mike Vallis and our other designers, like we brought whole computers. This is like, we weren't really working on laptops. Like you had desktop computers, you had these optical drives, like all this stuff set up in hotel rooms for us to actually get back, write, and put in screenshots. And then the art team's laying out these pages and they're creating files from an LA hotel room to be able to get prepped for the printers. And that was the worst because you were there, right, CJ?
Yeah, I was
you
there
were
for
with
that.
me on that. Yeah. So we got back and then we're like, what do we do? Like, how do we fit our E3 coverage to this? So we decided as kind of like the easiest way to do that is just a giant list of games. Like each one gets a tiny screenshot and a little maybe 2 or 3 sentence blurb. and that's it. It was such weak coverage. There's like no in-depth reporting. There's nothing you're going to get out of this. It's just like a little.
Where else is anyone going to get that at the time?
Well, that's true.
you were still doing a major service, I think.
Yeah, it just looked like a little tiny catalog of like, here's a brief glimpse at a bunch of games with no in-depth coverage whatsoever. But it took forever. We were like, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like if you go to like a film festival and they have like a screenshot or like a still from a movie and then like the little description, and you just kind of go through the catalog.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
That sounds like it. Yeah. And we were just up like overnight. It was like 3 a.m. We're still there, weary-eyed, just typing away. And then you don't remember everything. There's like hundreds and hundreds of games we're covering. And sometimes it's just like, you're just writing whatever. It's just like, oh, it's another tennis game. Blah, blah, blah. And just like, next.
Just
it's
another
like
karate game?
just another fighting game, whatever, next. And then you're just like shoving as much crap into these pages as possible. And you're taking shifts. And I think it was around 3, 4 in the morning when I finally went to take a little nap, and then someone else covered for me. But making it even worse was, so this is also last night at E3, and I think it's a Sony party. Like usually, like the big three, like Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft. I don't remember if it wasn't Microsoft back then, but it's probably Sega or whatever.
Yeah.
They all had big, cool parties that you went to attend. A lot of times with real musical talent and such. So literally it was like earlier in the night where we're like, we don't have enough computers for everyone to work. So there was like this kind of decision made. Like I remember the look of some of the guys like, well, I guess like we'll volunteer, like I volunteered to stay behind and write. And then some of the other guys like, we literally have nothing to do. We don't have a computer to work at. So I guess we'll go to the party. And they felt kind of bad and we kind of resented them. But it was like, but why would they just sit there and watch us work, right? So it's like, yeah, go. And then I remember, I think that was the year Sony had a party. I think it was at Dodger Stadium. And then literally we're high up in the hotel. We heard the party start. There was like, you could open up the windows and you could see this big party happening at Dodger Stadium with the lights. There's a concert going on. There's fireworks afterwards, and you could just see all this fun in the distance that we were not having.
And the only thing all of this, and all you hear from you is just the sound of a keyboard.
Yeah.
Clicking away.
And a lot of cursing, I'm sure.
And a lot of cursing and profanity. Oh, that's so bad. Dodger Stadium. Man.
Is that right? Does that all sound right, Chris? So long ago.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember opening the curtains and looking out and be like, oh, you can see the party. Like how much worse can they make it? Like it's like rubbing it in. Like
it's right outside your door.
Yeah,
you're not allowed to open it.
Well, the other thing about those early days was that there weren't hotels that were nearby the LA Convention Center. Like I don't know if you remember the accommodations that we had. It was quite a wide range because I think one year there was like a Holiday Inn that was across the street, and then the Figueroa was like the closest hotel.
Place. Yeah,
for a long time. Now that's changed completely with that area. But for a while, it was like, where the heck do we stay? Like you'd be a mile away from the show, and you'd have to like walk or run there. So
the Figueroa bar was like the networking spot. After hours, I found. So I think that like our experiences are a lot different based on what our roles were, because like when I was during my EGM years, and where we were based in Chicago, but like 90% of the industry was on the West Coast, like because I was the previews editor, again, the best and brightest, like Shu. But I spent my whole month on the phone with PR people, right? Like that was my sort of day to day, but I never only saw them if they made trips out here or we made the odd trips out there. So like my memory of E3 during my EGM years was I did not tour the booths very often. I didn't play a whole lot on the show floor. I remember almost feeling jealous of some of the other editors who had gone and played this amazing game on, like gone through the Nintendo booth and everything, because I didn't do any of that. Like I spent all my time sort of meeting up with contacts, and there were some meetings, but they were very like company specific, and they weren't necessarily for really exciting games half the time. It's like, here's the latest surfing game that Accolade is putting out because everybody's doing one of these games now and that sort of thing. But like, I remember going in the morning and just being wall to wall meetings with people, and not checking a lot of the show floor. I still got to enjoy sort of the atmosphere and the energy, but I know that that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. And I know like CJ's experience was probably different because, of course, as the news editor, I know he was doing lots of interviews and stuff like that.
Yeah. And
Shu was probably doing business stuff because he was the important guy. But, you know, I loved it though. Like it was a huge adrenaline rush for me. Like it was 3 days of just nonstop, absolutely exhausted by the end of it. Like couldn't even lift my head. Like, but I looked forward to it every year. I dreaded it and looked forward to it every year because it was just so busy.
Yeah, I actually have a different take on those meetings. Like, I think my early E3s, I'm like, man, I don't want to be in this back room in meetings right. and such. But my later years, I liked it because it's so exhausting.
Oh,
and
God,
it's like nice to like, I sit in the air conditioned room. Usually it's a little bit quieter. You don't have to. Yeah, you could get something to drink. You could get hydrated and sit and take a load off your feet and sit there and have games brought to you, right? And then versus having to
games.
Versus like having to wait on a show floor and maybe like wait in a small line. Like a lot of times we didn't have to wait in lines. Like it was like we kind of. That was the one nice thing about being in media. It's like when you went to your meeting time, they'll like either cut you in front of other people or cut you in front of the line, or if there's like a big theater display, you had a side entrance where you got to get seated first versus the other people. So that was
Robin
nice.
Williams off the controller so you could
well, and then but EGM would have exhibitor passes because we had a booth. Ziff Davis would have a booth, so we could get in early before the show actually opened and run around and look at anything that would be too crowded once the doors actually opened.
That's true.
I remember one year I was like, Perfect Dark was out, and I was like the first time Nintendo was demoing it, and I waited in line because it was not a meeting. It was just like one of the extra games I wanted to see, and then I was like, I'll wait in line, and then like a normal person, and I'm like, after a while, I'm like, these people are not moving, and I'm like, I have to get going. I've been waiting for a long time, so it was like the one and only time at E3 where I pulled the press thing. And it's like I went and grabbed someone from Nintendo. I was like, hey, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm here with media and I've been waiting a long time. Is there any way I can like get in on one of these demos? And then I was like apologizing to the person that they kicked off. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm doing this for work, I promise. But I wasn't just trying to like, I want to play this game and I'm important.
But you did just want to play that game anyway.
That's right. That's what it was.
Yeah. It was an important game. I was like, I need to check this out before I leave.
Yeah, Perfect Dark. I mean, yeah.
The last year that I went to E3, it was like 2000. I don't know, like maybe 2005, but it was as a developer. But I wasn't working a booth, and so all I had was just sort of it was like the publisher. There was a demo that I had actually worked on that was being shown like behind closed doors. Actually, I couldn't get in to see it. But like my experience up to that point had been going as press, and then this time I was going as just an attendee, I think is all the badge said. I hated it. I mean, the energy was cool and everything, but like I think I have a bit of an aversion. Well, I don't think I know. I have a bit of an aversion to like big crowds anyway. And it's like before I was moving through these crowds like with a purpose and had somewhere to be and had work to do and everything, and the last time I went I was just sort of aimless, and it was kind of that situation where like anything that's worth seeing or playing, it has like a 1 hour line.
Yeah.
And I was like, this sucks.
I don't know.
Like,
I always kind of enjoyed just the energy of E3. Like even when I wasn't covering the show, when I was there just for work, I would be wandering around just watching people enjoy video game culture.
That part was
right?
cool.
And that part was the Nintendo booth is sort of the prime example of that. It's the one where the most members of the public are camped out, and you just see so much enthusiasm for games. It's just kind of electric in that way, and a bit rejuvenating too. If you're a little burnt out, it's just like, man, like people are so excited about all this stuff. You go by the Sega Atlas booth and you see the Kamurocho like street that they have set up for the Yakuza games, and it's like, wow, like this stuff is great. Like I love sort of experiencing it by proxy. Like if I'm not playing the game. Just the enthusiasm for all this stuff is infectious.
It's pretty cool. A big part of E3 were the big moments, right? Those big reveals. And, you read, especially since E3 this year has been canceled. In the wake of that, you had all the top 10 E3 moments. What were some big E3 moments for you that you remember vividly as being these, oh man, not even like sea change moments, just like what was some big moments that you guys experienced? I'd love to hear about some of those.
The 56K modem in the Dreamcast. That is the first.
Really?
That's because the pre E3 pressers were my favorite part by far. Just because that was where, when you were going to be surprised, that's where it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, when they announced, I mean, it was a rumor that they were going to do it anyway, but they put the 56K. This sounds so stupid now saying it out loud, but it was. I just remember being like, because I was a big Sega fan, and I was like, and the Saturn it had been such a dismal failure. So I was like, oh, I'm so excited about the Dreamcast. It's so cool. Everything about it was great. And then I think, was it Bernie Stoller at the time?
Yep.
I think. Stood up and was on the stage and was like, there's a storm coming, and there was like this Dreamcast logo coming across the Pacific behind him on his screen, and they called out that it was going to have a 56K modem packed in. It was like, yeah, this is the best. Online gaming is going to change everything. And yeah, I don't know why, but that just really sticks out to me.
That's awesome. I forgot it had a modem in it. That's really, really cool. Very cool. CJ, what about you, man? Do you have any, again, those big moments that kind of stick with you?
Yeah, one of the big ones for me was with the GameCube. I think this was maybe Satoru Iwata's first appearance at an E3. Nintendo had a press conference where they showed off Smash Brothers for the GameCube, and I just remember getting so hyped for that trailer. Yeah, that was a big moment. I was a huge Nintendo fan anyway, so like seeing anything Nintendo get shown off was always huge. But that moment but prior to the GameCube's introduction in the US was probably my biggest excitement.
And I imagine Nintendo went pretty hard. I'm sure the big three, you feel like they were always vying for attention between the competitors?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I imagine so, right? Yeah. Shu, what about you, man?
Did I mention Soul Calibur?
Soul Calibur?
Seen that?
Yeah.
They've seen that. Man, I wish I would have prepared for this, because I don't know how many E3s did I go to, like 17 or 18 of them.
Wow.
And they were a long time ago, Shu.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember all of them. But some things that came to mind was my first E3, walking into that exhibit hall, was the first one you'd never forget, right? It's like, holy shit, this is so incredible. Like, this is just all gaming. I think you don't realize the scope of how big the industry is until you walk into E3 back in those days, right? You're like, like if you hear about this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's like, that's just some arbitrary number. It's like you can't fathom that number in your head, right? And then you don't see the business, and you could go to stores, you could see stuff in your office, like, but that's about it. And then you'd see all that excitement. You're like, holy crap, this is a big business, and you're excited to be a part of it. I do remember a couple of memorable moments. Maybe I'll take it in this direction. Was sure. Sega one year had a press conference done in a style of Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update, where they had was that
Kevin
Nealon? Kevin Nealon, that's right.
Oh my god!
He did a Weekend Update style thing up there where he made announcements, and you could tell he had the same, what I was talking about earlier about this, like sort of celebrity contempt for the business. He's like, you could tell, I don't understand this stuff. I'm just like reading the script, but It was hilarious nonetheless. And then they just did this whole thing. And then their press conference was done in this Weekend Update style, which was a lot of fun. One of the cringiest moments was like, I'm sure CJ, you were there or you remember this, was this at a Nintendo press conference or keynote or something like that. And then this kid, he was wearing a bandana. He was trying to be, you could tell he's like a fan of all things Japanese. And then I think he came from a smaller website, Nintendo Fanboy.
Yep.
Wrote out this letter. He got a chance to say something to Miyamoto, like a question from the audience, right, to Miyamoto on stage. And then so he wrote out this letter in Japanese, and he was reading it, and he went on for a little while. No one in the audience, very few people in the audience knew what he was saying.
Yeah.
Speaking in this broken Japanese. And you could tell he worked on it. He rehearsed it. He was going to be so excited to be able to ask his question in Japanese. And then when he was done, Miyamoto was like, what? Like, he didn't understand it because the Japanese was that bad.
Oh, no.
And it was just like, you felt bad for the kid, but it was also cringy at the same time and all that stuff.
So funny.
Yeah.
And then so he just had to read it in English.
Yeah, they asked him to say it again in English.
Yeah.
And
Oh, my side hurts for him. Oh, no.
I know. It was
you remember what the question was, Shu?
No, do you? Oh my God,
Yes.
really? Well,
The question was to Miyamoto, how do you like working at Nintendo?
Oh, come on. No.
And when he
that's
broke in
awesome.
Japanese, it takes about 15 minutes.
I believe that press conference is on YouTube because that's the same one with the Smash Brothers reveal that I was talking about, 2001, I think.
Oh, my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, I was actually at that
wow.
Sunday too. I remember that.
My most memorable press conference moment was at Nokia. So Nokia did the N-Gage. I don't know if you remember the mobile phone that was supposed to also be a gaming platform. And one E3, they rented out like a big venue and invited all these press folks to come to their event, which we did. And they even like shuttled people from like the Nintendo press conference to their press conference. This was how serious they were. And it was like a double-decker bus that they had. And anyway, we all got there.
Wow.
And they had this announcement that the N-Gage was going to cost, I forget what it was, $3.99 or $4.99. And they had like written it in like grease paint on this girl's stomach was the price. And she comes out, and this was supposed to be the big reveal, the N-Gage that we've just shown you that can play the mobile phone that can play video games the way that you want. And here's the price. And this girl walks out on stage. I'm sure she thought she was going to get applause, to dead silence. Like you could hear a pin drop in this face. Like nobody cared. It was just absolutely the cringiest, and you can still read some accounts of that press conference online, but it was before anybody was like recording conferences or anything like that. So unfortunately, you kind of have to go by what information's been passed down. But that's like an all-time terrible like fiasco of a press conference.
What a disaster.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. Yikes. So that just sounds fun and terrifying at the same time. That's interesting. So with our last few minutes though, I do want to touch on kind of where we're at with E3. And actually real quick, when did they open it up to the public? Was that relatively recently, or was it
2016.
did it ebb and flow? 2016, right?
2016.
Yeah. Did any of you guys go during that era, or were you all pretty much out of it by then?
I was at the 2016 show. And
how was it with the public there?
I thought it was fine.
Okay.
I mean, the public was there a lot before that.
Yes.
They just weren't there as the public. Like that first
Interesting.
year that I went in 98, there are at least a dozen people who went as part of our website who never wrote a single word on our website. And some of those people are industry people now. Like I'm pretty sure like Che Chow was one of them at one point. And like it was, Mark McDonald was in that crew at some point too. Like there were people who ended up going legitimately later, but there were a lot of us that went that were not legit members of the press.
It's true.
I was there, I think I was at PlayStation at the time, so I was out of media. So I was more like walking around and doing meetings and such, but it did feel more crowded to me.
It
like the
was
aisles and
way more
like
crowded. Yes. You could not move. Like if you were not like done with whatever business you had to do on the show floor, like once the public got in, it was just madness.
Yeah, I can just imagine, because again, I always think about it in terms of people go to these things to do work. Now, I've never been to one of these things before. The only experience I have that's somewhat similar is I cover South by Southwest every year. I've done it for now the last 8 years. And people don't realize that most of the people at these things are there to like get work done, networking, and I cover music, so it's all, hey, we want to see these new bands, and we'll go to this venue at 2:00 in the morning to see so and so. But people are working, so that mixture of people there to have fun. Because if you're in the public, you're just there to play games and and check out the environment. But man, if you're trying to get work done and generate things and stuff and articles, I can see that being just a bit of a bear. But
yeah, like
I can imagine the energy was cool though too.
Working in media, I think, would be a lot different if you had to compete with people on the show floor to play.
That's what I'm saying.
Demos
Yeah.
and stuff. But by then, I think a lot of these sort of businessy stuff had moved away from the show floor. Like there's a JW Marriott not too far from the show itself in LA Live, and like that's where most of my like business meetings were happening in that area and not actually on the show floor. So like restaurants in and around E3 was where you'd like meet up for with developers and whatnot. But yeah, a lot of that stuff was off the show floor at that show and in 2017 as well.
I have no idea. I don't have numbers on this, so I don't know how widespread it was, but I've seen it in even conferences besides E3 where people would go and do the networking and those side meetings and those offsite meetings a lot and not actually buy a ticket. Like for example, I used to work at a VentureBeat, and then we'd have an event like the GamesBeat event conference, and I would run into people like, oh, so-and-so industry friends, and they're not actually there. They're just like waiting in the lobby, and they're taking advantage of people being there to talk to them and to meet with them, but they didn't have a ticket to the event, so they didn't provide a ticket sale to that event, right? So, which is fine, but I think that's got to be one of the contributing factors to why E3 is not around anymore. It's like more and more they're like, all right, we're just going to have meetings around E3 and not be a part of E3. Yeah. Like Devolver Digital would have like, oh, we'll just set up across the street and take advantage of the E3 crowd. And then I think it's like EA and Microsoft started having their conferences off-site. And then I was like, we're just going to do everything over here so we could take advantage of everyone being in town. And not actually, but be part of E3. And that just got bigger and bigger. And then they started doing more things online with the directs and things like that. Then it's just like the show became less and less necessary over time.
Yeah, and that kind of dovetails into kind of my last section of this conversation is, and again, I said at the outset, I didn't want this to be a eulogy. I didn't want to eulogize E3 because you never know, it could come back. But what do you think caused that decline? There's the obvious answers, right? Internet and, direct showcases and all that fun stuff. But not only really what caused the downfall of E3, but is there a chance for a new E3 to surface? Is there an opportunity here that we're missing? And what's missing in what are we missing that we don't have this anymore?
I think the fan focused stuff that's popped up is what the new E3 is to me. It just like, I mean, you did touch on it, and you're saying not only, but I think you're right. And Shu is right. It's not required anymore to get your, back 20 years ago to work in the press or to be a buyer or even to be one of the publishers and developers. This sort of show was required. It brought everybody like from the world over to one location where you could do business and you could get press coverage. But there was so much money spent on that and so much time. Like, it's not even the millions of dollars that they were spending on booths and things, but looking at it from like the development side. I mean, the one E3 that I was in game dev that we actually sent anything, I mean, I was taken off my regular work for a month to throw together a demo. That's a month of production we lost on a very tight deadline anyway to put together a demo. And it wasn't just me who was taken off, so that getting rid of that whole like deadline, that single yearly deadline that you have to do something like that from a development standpoint, I think, where it's more like, well, we can just do a direct when we're ready to show it.
Right.
Yeah. It's not disrupting development. And especially now where games are so much bigger and there's so much more money involved. I think that's another major contributing factor outside of the fact that we've got so much access. Like, everybody has so much access now. It's not like a select small group of press, or like if you want to be on TV or you want to have video at all, you have to have the television cameras there while they're going to be in one place at this one time of year. Now you set up a camera in front of a green screen and stand in front of it and talk to it and send it out to millions of people. Like, it's so much different than it was.
Yeah, and it's cheaper for companies to be like, we'll have this event to show off these games on our own terms at our own campus, and then just fly the people we want to fly in instead of everyone in the world. Just like we'll select the media or influencers who are friendly to us, who we know will like our stuff. And then they control the marketing cycle for that, right? Instead of it like, okay, you're now one of, like, you might have this really big game, and then now you get like one article on IGN, and then it's kind of lost and buried amongst 500 other E3 stories. Or you take that off of the E3 cycle, do it on your own terms, do it for cheaper, and then now you own that period of marketing, right? You like, okay, we've taken over. We can do some paid media. There's going to be social media talk about this. All the influencers are going to be talking about this at the same time. All the online coverage will happen at the same time. Then you own that, and then everyone in the world sees that, as opposed to just being one of a fraction of E3 coverage.
I mean, E3 anyway was all about marketing, right? It was all one big ad for these companies' products, right? And now they found a much easier, cheaper way to do that. Like, can you really blame anyone for taking that, right? And you still have,
that's fair,
on occasion, like you're the Summer Games Fest, or you have the Game Awards, where those are like big events where you can show off your new trailer, and those still are very appealing because they get eyeballs, right? And it's not like PAX is going to have as many people watching that as watching the Game Awards. So like it just sort of depends where you can get. But you're definitely getting to a larger audience than if E3 existed and you were just showing it to the people who attended.
So I guess the question really then lies, is there a future, or is there a need for an E3? Because I guess for me personally, and again, this is again me coming from music journalism piece that I do every year, is I like having these festivals because I like the idea of discovery. I love bouncing around from club to club in downtown Austin, 3 songs from this band, 4 songs from this band, 2 from this band, and just walking into places and discovering things. And I think when all the marketing is curated, it lends to less discovery. And I don't know if that trade-off, maybe that's just a sign of the times. That trade-off is just what it is now, because like you guys have said, really don't need it. Like every developer can put together a trailer and put it online, but I think there is something lost in that in-person sense of discovery personally.
There's definitely something lost, but I don't know that it's valuable enough to bring back something like E3.
That's fair.
Well, I think it's sort of been replaced, right, by consumer-focused events like PAX. And you get a very similar feeling, I think, walking around a PAX, where you can still find the sort of diamonds in the rough in the indie booths, and there's still that sort of excitement there. So I think it's changed, but to me, the events that are most like E3 are those sort of consumer-focused things. And actually, like if you're just a consumer excited about games and you want to play them, not like a media person, those are better just because they have, like free game rooms and competitions and like fan meetups, and they have panels, which E3 never had or anything like that. So like to me, there's a lot more value if you're just a fan going to one of those events over going to even what E3 well, not what E3 used to be, but what E3 has become, right?
Right. And that's kind of one of what I kind of land on too, is because, I attend not a good amount, but whenever I get a chance to, I try to attend retro gaming conventions. And, your PRGs and I said it wrong, but Portland Retro Gaming Expo and those things, those are extremely popular. Yeah. And because I think the focus is on community and that gamer experience where you're there to attend panels and listen to bands, cover bands, and all these different aspects that make that up. So I always think if E3 could almost serve that purpose, bring community together, bring people together, focus on that kind of connection that you would get at like a retro gaming convention. I wonder, but like you guys have said, maybe that ship has just sailed, and maybe the ship has sailed for that. I don't know.
I think you are idealizing an image of E3 from the mid-90s, early 2000s, where you read about it in magazines and you saw all these photo spreads, and it was very, like you could feel the excitement, sort of reverberate from the pages of those magazines, right? And I just don't think that event is justifiable anymore in a lot of ways.
That's fair.
I mean, I still get a little bit of that same excitement when a Nintendo Direct is announced or when
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
a PlayStation
Yeah.
Showcase is announced. Like, I get a little bit of that, like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for 6 a.m. tomorrow morning when the Direct starts or whatever. Like, you have these sort of, you know, it's not the 1 week in June, but it's still sort of now spread across many different months. You have these events that you can still get excited for, even as a fan.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, CJ's right. It was all about that. Excuse me, that one big event, and I'm not gonna lie, like I do miss it a lot. But I don't think it would ever be. Everything's just so different now. Even the industry itself is so different now. You know, back then you had you had consoles and PC. You had like the big three, whether that was Sega, Nintendo, and Sony, or you know that shifted through the years. But
Right.
and then you had sort of all the satellite booths around it, and then you also had like Kensha Hall, which is where you could go down and just find cool stuff. Like that's where Guitar Hero was born, basically. And you know, now it wouldn't be that. You know, it just wouldn't, because games are such a different beast now, and the ecosystem is so much different than it was. Back to what I think CJ's right, we have this idealized vision of what E3 would be when we're really talking about what it was 20 or 25 years ago.
Yeah. And I've worked with a lot of people who are like, oh, I hated E3, like, oh, it was so much work. And they're right, you know, like Shu mentioning that we were staying up till 4 or 5 in the morning shipping pages. Like, yes, E3 for the media was a lot of work, but man, it was so much fun too. And to think about, I saw Mario 64 before it was out, or, you know, I played Smash Brothers, or I saw Dinosaur Planet, and that game got turned
into an N64 game,
into Star Fox Adventures. Right, exactly. Or I played Conker's 12 Tales before it got turned into Bad Fur Day. Like, you think about those moments and you're like, man, that was awesome. And to me, anyway, I hate to see the show languish and die off. But the excitement about video games, I think, still lives on in some of these satellite shows and events.
No, totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I do think it's a shame, and I think that's a very interesting. You meant how it's like this. Again, I look at it from, you know, from the eyes of a kid who would open up, you know, EGM when I was like 16. Oh my gosh, this is all these games. And I guess the reality of it is now is we still have that. It's just in a different form. And, you know, obviously we live in an era now where all of this information and trailers and excitement. You know, I love when the Indie Showcase comes out for Nintendo. It's like, oh, this is cool. There was the cool little discoveries, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think there is something, a shame that it's not there, but there's still lots of cool stuff on the horizon. If I can end this conversation on a high note, I don't want to be depressing. Like, all right, well, here is E3. Here's your grave. We're just gonna bury you here. Here lies. But I think cool things are going to come through it. And also, again, for me, who lives a lot in the retro gaming space, there's always the retro gaming festivals, and I've been to a couple, and I go to Classic Game Fest here every year in Austin, and I've been to other ones, you know, here, there, and everywhere. And that's where I think the community lives in those scenes, and that's the stuff I love.
So, talking about ending on a high note, I know we're over time, but I have a story that I want to tell.
Yeah, go for it.
Because E3 was kind of an icebreaker between me and one of the people in EGM. So, the first time I went to E3 was '98, and that was the year that Sony was showing Gran Turismo, the first Gran Turismo for PlayStation.
Wow!
And they had a competition where you could go set a time on one of the tracks, and whoever set the fastest time would win. They were giving away a trip to Laguna Seca in California to go see a sports car race. So I was so excited about Gran Turismo that I had actually imported it and played it nonstop, and was really good at it. So this was my first E3. And there was a huge line, and I had a bunch of meetings, but I was also working for this crappy little website that nobody knew, so I knew nobody would care if I missed some of these. So I went and stood in line for like an hour to put in a lap. And I went in and put in this lap, and it was the fastest lap by, I don't know, a few seconds. And I remember the guy saying like, yeah, that was a great lap. Really good work. And he said, so come back at the end of the day and we'll see if your time holds. So I did. I went and did my meetings, and I came back at the end of the day, and lo and behold, I stayed at the top of the heap, and I won the trip. I took my dad to California. It was like the first time you ever went to California, so it was awesome in that regard too. But the Sony guy said there was this one guy who stood in line over and over and over again to try to beat your time, and he couldn't do it. Like, he kept getting closer and closer, but he just couldn't do it. So a couple years later, I'm working at Ziff Davis, and I get switched over from Expert Gamer to EGM, and I think he was the lead designer, Cyril Wojcik, I think is how you said his last name, right?
Yep.
Cyril, Cy. We were just chatting one day, and it came up. And I told that, like, E3 98 and Gran Turismo and everything came up because he's a racing fan too. And I told that story, and he just gave me this look, and he said,
No
yeah,
way.
I was the other guy.
Oh, wow.
I spent my whole day waiting in line to try to beat that time, and I just
Wow.
couldn't do it.
Couldn't
So,
take you down. Oh,
it was
that's
like it was a
crazy.
great icebreaker, right? Like, not that
How
I mean,
fun is
not
that?
that it was not that any of those guys were hard to talk to anyway, but it was just like, oh my god, that was you, of all the people that were at that E3 and were in that contest.
That's
Love that
amazing.
story.
Yeah, it was
Love
great.
that story. Once again, many thanks to Greg, CJ, and Dan for taking time out of their very busy schedules to reminisce about the days of E3 past and what we can expect in the future. And even if it's nothing, there is solace to know that there is something that us gamers who want to know about the latest and greatest can hang our hats on. Many thanks to Kev from my Discord for helping to cut up the interviews, and many thanks to you for listening to A Gamer Looks at 40. And until next time, continue being nice to yourselves and each other.